Three popular students thought they could humiliate the quiet new girl by forcing her to eat cafeteria scraps from the dumpster. What they didn't know was that Emma Rodriguez had neutralized enemy combatants in 3 different countries before her 18th birthday. This is the story of how one moment of cruelty revealed a secret that changed everything at Oakwood Regional High School forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emma Rodriguez pressed her back against the cold metal of Locker 247, watching the hallway traffic flow around her like water around a stone. 3 weeks into her senior year at Oakwood Regional High School, and she had already memorized every face, every routine, every potential threat assessment that her training had hardwired into her brain. The morning rush between first and second period created the perfect cover for someone who preferred to remain invisible, which was exactly how Emma intended to keep it. At 17, Emma possessed the kind of unremarkable appearance that served her well in her previous life and continued to benefit her now. Average height at 5'6", with shoulder-length dark brown hair that she kept pulled back in a simple ponytail. She had learned long ago that blending in was often more valuable than standing out. Her clothes were practical rather than fashionable, dark jeans and plain hoodies purchased from the base exchange at Fort Carson, where her uncle Colonel James Rodriguez was currently stationed. Everything about her appearance suggested an ordinary military kid trying to finish high school, which was both completely true and utterly misleading. The students of Oakwood Regional moved through their morning routines with the kind of casual confidence that came from knowing exactly where they belonged in the social ecosystem. Emma watched them with the detached observation skills that had kept her alive in places most teenagers couldn't imagine, mentally cataloging the various cliques and power structures that governed this particular battlefield. The athletes clustered near the trophy cases, their letterman jackets creating a sea of burgundy and gold. The academic elite huddled around the bulletin board where National Honor Society announcements competed for space with college recruitment flyers. The social media influencers posed casually by the windows, where the natural lighting was most flattering for their morning selfies. And then there were the apex predators, the ones who ruled through a combination of wealth, beauty, and carefully cultivated cruelty. Emma's tactical awareness had identified them within her first week, the same way she had once learned to spot potential insurgents in crowded marketplaces. Madison Wells moved through the hallway like she owned it, which, according to local gossip, her family practically did. Her father was the largest real estate developer in Riverside, and her mother sat on the school board, giving Madison a level of untouchable status that she wielded like a precision weapon. Madison's physical presence commanded attention even when she wasn't trying. Tall and elegant with the kind of natural blonde hair that caught every ray of available light, she dressed in clothes that cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month. But it wasn't her appearance that made her dangerous. It was the calculating intelligence behind her perfectly made-up blue eyes. Emma had encountered interrogators with less predatory instincts than Madison Wells possessed naturally. Tyler Brooks orbited around Madison like a satellite, his massive frame and quarterback confidence making him the perfect complement to her social dominance. At 6'2", with broad shoulders that strained against his letterman jacket, Tyler had the kind of casual arrogance that came from never having faced real consequences for his actions. His sandy brown hair was always perfectly styled, and his smile had the practiced charm of someone who had been told he was special since childhood. Emma's assessment placed him as dangerous primarily due to his size and his willingness to follow Madison's lead without question. Ashley Kim completed the triumvirate, though her role was more complex than it initially appeared. Petite and fashionable with an expensive camera phone that never left her hands, Ashley documented their activities with the dedication of a war correspondent. Emma had observed that Ashley's cruelty was different from her friends, born not from natural malice but from desperate fear of losing her position in the hierarchy. This made her potentially more dangerous, as fear-motivated individuals were often the most unpredictable. The first bell rang, sending students scrambling toward their second period classes. Emma shouldered her worn military surplus backpack and began the careful navigation toward advanced chemistry, keeping to the edges of the hallway where the traffic was lighter and the sight lines were clearer. Her uncle had drilled into her the importance of maintaining situational awareness at all times, a habit that had become as natural as breathing during her years of active service. Chemistry class offered the kind of structured environment that Emma found comforting after the chaos of the hallways. Mrs. Patterson, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes, ran her classroom with military precision that Emma could appreciate. The lab tables were arranged in perfect rows, the equipment was meticulously maintained, and the expectations were clearly defined. It was one of the few places in the school where Emma felt she could let her guard down slightly. She had chosen a lab table near the back corner, positioning herself where she could observe the entire room while maintaining easy access to both the main exit and the emergency door that led directly to the parking lot. Old habits died hard, and Emma had learned that preparation was the difference between coming home and not coming home at all. Her lab partner was Jake Martinez, a quiet junior with intelligent dark eyes who reminded Emma of some of the younger soldiers she had served alongside. He was respectful without being intimidated, curious about chemistry without being pushy about personal details, and most importantly, he didn't seem interested in the social dynamics that consumed most of their classmates. As Mrs. Patterson began explaining the day's experiment on molecular bonding, Emma found herself actually relaxing for the first time since arriving at Oakwood Regional. Science was logical, predictable, governed by rules that didn't change based on social status or family wealth. In chemistry, results were determined by precise measurements and proper technique, not by who your parents knew or how many followers you had on Instagram. It was refreshingly honest after navigating the complex social warfare that defined the rest of high school. The period passed peacefully, with Emma and Jake successfully completing their assignment, while maintaining the kind of comfortable working relationship that didn't require constant conversation. Emma appreciated Jake's focus and competence, qualities that had been essential in her former life, where distracted teammates could get everyone killed. When the bell rang signaling the end of second period, she felt genuinely disappointed to leave the ordered environment of the chemistry lab. Third period brought American history with Miss Patricia Gonzalez, a passionate educator who had the unfortunate habit of assigning collaborative projects that forced students out of their comfort zones. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emma had managed to avoid most group work during her first 3 weeks, but today's assignment on Cold War tensions required partnerships that Ms. Gonzalez insisted on selecting randomly. Emma found herself paired with Rebecca Stone, a quiet sophomore who seemed more interested in her notebook doodles than in discussing nuclear deterrence theory. The irony of discussing military strategy with a teenage girl who had never left Colorado was not lost on Emma, but she approached the assignment with the same professionalism she brought to everything else. Rebecca proved to be more insightful than her daydreaming suggested, and they managed to outline a presentation on the Cuban Missile Crisis that satisfied Ms. Gonzalez's requirements while keeping Emma's contributions appropriately generic. She had learned to discuss military topics in theoretical terms, avoiding any specifics that might hint at her personal experience with actual combat operations. Fourth period was Advanced Placement English Literature with Mr. Davidson, an earnest young teacher who believed passionately in the transformative power of great writing. Emma actually enjoyed the reading assignments, finding unexpected parallels between classic literature and her own experiences with moral complexity in impossible situations. Today's discussion focused on the nature of heroism in wartime literature, a topic that Emma could have contributed to significantly if she hadn't been committed to maintaining her cover as an ordinary military dependent. When Mr. Davidson asked the class to consider whether true heroism required public recognition or whether anonymous acts of courage were equally valid, Emma found herself thinking about the teammates she had lost, soldiers who had died performing acts of incredible bravery that would never be publicly acknowledged due to the classified nature of their missions. She raised her hand tentatively, offering a carefully worded response about how the most meaningful acts of service often went unrecognized, earning an approving nod from Mr. Davidson and a few interested glances from her classmates. The morning passed without incident, allowing Emma to maintain the low profile that her uncle had insisted was essential for successfully transitioning back to civilian life. Colonel Rodriguez had made it clear that her military service was to remain strictly confidential, both for security reasons and to give her the best possible chance at experiencing a normal teenage existence. Emma understood the logic, even if she sometimes felt like she was living a lie by omission. Her uncle's reasoning was sound from a tactical perspective. Emma's service record was classified at levels that required presidential authorization to access, and her specialized training had involved operations that could never be publicly acknowledged. More importantly, Jim Rodriguez wanted his niece to have the chance to be a regular teenager, to experience the normal challenges of high school without the weight of her extraordinary past defining every interaction. He believed, perhaps naively, that she could leave her military identity behind and simply be Emma, the high school senior, focused on college applications and prom dresses instead of threat assessments and tactical planning. The lunch period represented the most challenging part of Emma's daily routine, as the cafeteria's open layout and chaotic social dynamics created multiple variables that were difficult to control. She had developed a system over her first 3 weeks, arriving early to avoid the rush, selecting a table near the emergency exits, and eating quickly before the peak congestion made movement difficult. Today followed the same pattern, with Emma claiming her usual spot at a small table that offered good sight lines, while remaining relatively isolated from the main social clusters. She had just opened her brown bag lunch, another habit carried over from military life, where MREs had made her appreciate simple, reliable food when the familiar sound of expensive heels on linoleum announced Madison Wells' arrival in the cafeteria. Emma's situational awareness kicked into high gear automatically, though she kept her eyes focused on her sandwich while tracking the movement of Madison's group through her peripheral vision. Madison's entrance was calculated for maximum impact. Her designer outfit perfectly coordinated and her blonde hair styled in loose waves that caught the fluorescent lighting dramatically. Tyler followed close behind, his letterman jacket unzipped to display the championship t-shirt underneath, while Ashley brought up the rear with her phone already recording their grand entrance for whatever social media platform would best showcase their popularity. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Conversations paused as heads turned to track their progress across the cafeteria. Younger students shifted their positions to get better views or photos. Even the teachers on lunch duty found themselves watching the procession with the kind of resigned attention usually reserved for natural disasters or celebrity sightings. Emma continued eating her sandwich with steady, measured bites, but her mind was cataloging everything about the group's behavior patterns. Madison's route across the cafeteria was designed to maximize her visibility while allowing her to survey her domain like a general reviewing troops. Tyler's positioning provided both protection and intimidation, his size and athletic reputation serving as an unspoken threat to anyone who might challenge Madison's authority. Ashley's constant documentation created a permanent record of their social dominance, while simultaneously providing ammunition for future psychological warfare against their enemies. They claimed a large round table in the center of the cafeteria, the prime real estate that had been mysteriously vacant despite the crowded conditions. Emma noted that several students had moved away from nearby tables without any obvious coercion, suggesting that Madison's influence extended far beyond direct confrontation. This was the kind of sophisticated social control that reminded Emma of the psychological operations she had studied during her advanced training. For 20 minutes, Emma's lunch period proceeded according to plan. She finished her sandwich, drank her water, and prepared to make her strategic withdrawal before the cafeteria reached peak occupancy. It was a routine that had kept her invisible and safe for 3 weeks, a small victory in the larger campaign of surviving high school without incident. Then Jake Martinez approached her table, and everything changed. Jake carried his lunch tray with the careful precision of someone who had clearly been the victim of accidents in the past. His dark eyes darted nervously around the cafeteria as he paused beside Emma's table, obviously working up the courage to speak. Emma's training had taught her to recognize fear in all its forms, and Jake was definitely afraid of something beyond just social rejection. "Hey, Emma," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the cafeteria noise. "Would it be okay if I sat here? My usual table is." He glanced toward a corner where a group of underclassmen were pointedly avoiding eye contact with Madison's crew. "It's kind of complicated today." Emma followed his gaze and immediately understood the situation. Madison was holding court at her central table, but her attention was focused on the corner where Jake usually sat. Ashley had her phone pointed in that direction, clearly documenting whatever psychological torture they had planned for the younger students. Tyler was grinning with the kind of anticipation that suggested he was looking forward to some form of entertainment at someone else's expense. Emma's tactical assessment of the situation took less than 3 seconds. Jake was seeking temporary sanctuary, which meant that sitting with her would make both of them targets. The logical response would be to politely decline and maintain her own security. Getting involved in other people's conflicts violated every principle of operational security that had been drilled into her during training. But Jake reminded her of Private Mitchell, a 19-year-old communications specialist who had been targeted by insurgents specifically because of his youth and apparent vulnerability. Emma had spent weeks protecting Mitchell until he gained enough confidence and experience to handle himself in hostile territory. The same protective instincts that had made her an effective soldier were now telling her that Jake needed an ally, even if it meant compromising her own position. "Sure," Emma said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "Have a seat." Jake's relief was visible as he quickly settled into the chair, keeping his back to Madison's table in what Emma recognized as a futile attempt to avoid detection. Emma's position gave her a clear view of Madison's reaction to this development, and she didn't like what she was seeing. Madison's perfectly sculpted eyebrows had risen in what appeared to be genuine surprise, as if she hadn't expected anyone to openly associate with one of her targets. The conversation that followed was carefully neutral, with Jake expressing genuine gratitude for Emma's partnership in chemistry class, and Emma responding with the kind of polite but distant friendliness that she hoped would minimize the impact of this interaction. They discussed the molecular bonding experiment, compared notes on Mrs. Patterson's teaching style, and managed to maintain a normal conversation despite the psychological pressure radiating from the center of the cafeteria. Emma was hyper-aware of being observed, her peripheral vision tracking Ashley's phone as it occasionally swung in their direction. Madison's table had grown quieter, with more attention focused on Emma and Jake's interaction than on their own conversations. Tyler had shifted his position to get a better view of their table, and his expression had taken on the calculating look that Emma had learned to associate with predators selecting their prey. The warning signs were clear to anyone with tactical training. But Jake seemed oblivious to the danger his simple request for companionship had created. Emma found herself in the familiar position of protecting someone who didn't understand the full scope of the threat they were facing. It was a responsibility she had never asked for, but couldn't bring herself to abandon. When the lunch period ended, Emma and Jake parted ways with the kind of casual politeness that characterized most of their interactions. Emma hoped that the incident would be forgotten in the chaos of afternoon classes, that Madison's attention would move on to other targets, and that her brief moment of human decency wouldn't have lasting consequences for either of them. She was wrong on all counts. Fifth period brought calculus with Mr. Peterson, a mathematics teacher who approached his subject with the kind of methodical precision that Emma found reassuring. The ordered world of functions and derivatives provided a temporary escape from the social complexities of high school, allowing Emma to focus on problems that had definitive solutions and predictable outcomes. She had always excelled at mathematics, finding comfort in the logical progression from problem to solution that reminded her of mission planning and tactical analysis. Her desk was positioned in the second row, close enough to the board to see Mr. Peterson's detailed explanations, but far enough back to maintain good situational awareness of the classroom. The afternoon light streaming through the windows created a pleasant working environment, and Emma found herself actually enjoying the challenge of the day's lesson on related rates problems. The peaceful atmosphere was shattered when Ashley Kim entered the classroom 10 minutes late, clutching a hall pass and offering an elaborate apology about a student council emergency that had required her immediate attention. Emma's instincts went on high alert as Ashley selected an empty desk directly behind her, a position that would have been unremarkable if not for the fact that Ashley had never shown any interest in advanced mathematics during Emma's 3 weeks. At the school, Mr. Peterson accepted Ashley's explanation with the kind of weary resignation that suggested this wasn't the first time one of Madison's crew had disrupted his class with mysterious emergencies. He resumed his explanation of the related rates formula, but Emma found it impossible to concentrate with Ashley's presence behind her, like a storm cloud gathering strength. The harassment began subtly, with Ashley dropping her pencil multiple times and bumping Emma's chair while retrieving it. Each contact was brief and could have been accidental, but Emma's training had taught her to recognize patterns in seemingly random events. Ashley was conducting reconnaissance, testing Emma's reactions and gathering intelligence for whatever operation Madison was planning. When Ashley began taking photos over Emma's shoulder, supposedly of the blackboard, but actually documenting Emma's notes and personal belongings, Emma knew that her brief period of anonymity was officially over. Ashley's phone camera clicked softly as she captured images of Emma's worn backpack, her carefully organized binder, and the military precision handwriting that Emma had never been able to completely civilize for civilian use. Emma forced herself to remain motionless during Ashley's surveillance operation, knowing that any reaction would only provide more ammunition for whatever psychological warfare Madison was preparing to unleash. She continued taking notes on related rates problems while mentally preparing for the escalation that she knew was inevitable. Her military experience had taught her that intelligence gathering always preceded direct action, and Ashley's behavior indicated that the reconnaissance phase was nearly complete. The final bell of the day couldn't come soon enough for Emma, who had spent the last hour of calculus class feeling like a specimen under a microscope. Ashley's documentation had been thorough and systematic, suggesting a level of tactical planning that Emma had to grudgingly respect even as she recognized the threat it represented. When Mr. Peterson dismissed the class, Emma packed her belongings with deliberate calm while Ashley hurried out ahead of her, undoubtedly rushing to report her findings to Madison and Tyler. Emma's walk to her locker took her through the main hallway, where the end-of-day chaos provided excellent cover for anyone who wanted to observe without being observed. She maintained her normal routine, exchanging her afternoon textbooks for homework assignments, while scanning her surroundings for signs of the trap that she knew was being prepared. Her locker was positioned near the main entrance, a location she had selected specifically for its multiple exit routes and high visibility to school staff. The attack, when it came, was perfectly timed and expertly executed. Emma had just closed her locker and shouldered her backpack when Madison Wells appeared beside her with the kind of casual confidence that suggested this encounter was anything but accidental. Tyler and Ashley flanked her at precise intervals, creating a formation that blocked Emma's access to the main exit while appearing to casual observers like a friendly conversation between classmates. "Emma Rodriguez," Madison said, her voice carrying the kind of false warmth that Emma had learned to associate with interrogators trying to establish rapport beginning serious questioning. "I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Madison Wells, and I basically run the social scene around here." Emma's response was carefully neutral, acknowledging Madison's introduction without providing any information that could be used against her. "Nice to meet you," she said, shifting her weight slightly to improve her balance in case the situation escalated beyond verbal confrontation. Madison's smile was perfect and completely predatory. "I couldn't help but notice you having lunch with Jake Martinez today. That was really sweet of you, helping out one of our school's charity cases. It shows you have a good heart." The words were delivered with surgical precision, designed to establish Madison's dominance while simultaneously insulting both Emma and Jake. Emma's training had included extensive instruction in psychological operations, and she recognized Madison's technique as sophisticated and effective. The compliment-wrapped insult was designed to make Emma feel grateful for Madison's attention while also making it clear that any association with Jake was considered an act of charity rather than genuine friendship. "Jake seems like a nice person," Emma replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to flood her system. Her body was automatically preparing for combat even as her mind sought ways to de-escalate the situation without revealing her capabilities. Tyler stepped closer, using his size to create additional psychological pressure. "The thing is," he said, his voice carrying the kind of casual menace that suggested he was accustomed using physical intimidation to get his way, "Jake's got some problems that make him bad company for someone like you. We'd hate to see you get dragged down by associating with losers." Emma's tactical assessment of Tyler confirmed her initial evaluation: dangerous due to size and aggression, but lacking the intelligence to be truly formidable. His approach was based on intimidation rather than strategy, which made him predictable but not necessarily less threatening. Emma had dealt with similar personality types during her military service, soldiers who confused physical dominance with actual leadership capability. Ashley remained slightly behind the other two, her phone positioned to capture whatever happened next. Emma noted that Ashley's documentation was probably intended for social media distribution, which meant that this confrontation was designed to be public and humiliating rather than private and violent. This was psychological warfare rather than physical combat, though Emma knew from experience that the distinction could change rapidly. "I appreciate your concern," Emma said, maintaining eye contact with Madison while tracking Tyler and Ashley's positions through her peripheral vision. "But I can take care of myself." Madison's laugh was like crystal breaking, beautiful and sharp enough to draw blood. "Oh honey, I'm sure you think you can. But Oakwood Regional has its own ecosystem, and there are predators here that you haven't even identified yet. Someone with your..." She paused, letting her gaze travel over Emma's plain clothes and worn backpack. "Limited resources needs to be very careful about making enemies." The threat was delivered with perfect deniability, wrapped in language that could be interpreted as helpful advice if repeated to school administrators. Emma recognized the sophistication of Madison's approach and realized that she was dealing with someone who had elevated social cruelty to an art form. This wasn't random bullying. It was strategic warfare conducted by someone who understood power dynamics at an instinctive level. "Thanks for the advice," Emma said, taking a small step backward to create more distance between herself and Tyler's looming presence. "I'll keep that in mind." Madison's expression shifted slightly, as if she had expected more resistance to her psychological assault. Emma's calm acceptance of the threat seemed to surprise her, though she recovered quickly with another perfectly practiced smile. "I'm sure you will," Madison said. "We should definitely continue this conversation sometime when we have more privacy. There's so much about Oakwood Regional that you still need to learn." The dismissal was clear, and Emma recognized it as a temporary tactical withdrawal rather than an end to hostilities. Madison's group moved away with the same coordinated precision they had used to approach, leaving Emma standing alone by her locker with the certain knowledge that this initial contact was merely the opening move in a campaign that would only escalate. Emma shouldered her backpack and walked toward the main exit, her mind already analyzing the encounter and planning for the inevitable escalation. Madison Wells had just declared war, and Emma found herself in the familiar position of being outnumbered, outgunned, and completely underestimated by an enemy who had no idea what they were really dealing with. The drive home to the small apartment she shared with her uncle provided time for Emma to process the day's events and consider her limited options. Colonel Rodriguez had been clear about his expectations: no fighting, no attention, no incidents. That might compromise her cover or his military career. Emma understood the reasoning behind these restrictions, but she also knew from experience that sometimes circumstances made peaceful resolution impossible. As she pulled into the parking lot of their modest apartment complex, Emma caught sight of her uncle's government-issued sedan and felt a familiar mixture of relief and apprehension. Jim Rodriguez was the closest thing to family she had left, and his opinion mattered more to her than she was willing to admit. But he was also a career military officer who had never attended civilian high school, and Emma wasn't sure he would understand the particular challenges she was facing at Oakwood Regional. The conversation ahead would require careful navigation, balancing honesty about her situation with respect for his concerns about maintaining their cover. Emma had learned during her years of service that the most important battles were often fought not with weapons, but with words, and tonight's discussion with her uncle would determine how she was allowed to respond to Madison Wells' declaration of war. The apartment Emma shared with her uncle reflected the transient nature of military life, furnished with the kind of practical pieces that could be packed and moved at a moment's notice. The walls displayed no personal photographs or decorative items that might reveal details about their past assignments or current situation. Everything was clean, organized, and deliberately impersonal, exactly the kind of environment that allowed them to disappear into civilian life without leaving traces of their true identities. Colonel James Rodriguez was waiting in the small kitchen when Emma arrived home, his dress uniform hanging precisely in the closet, while he wore the off-duty civilian clothes that never quite looked natural on his military bearing. At 42, Jim Rodriguez carried himself with the kind of alert posture that marked him as career special operations, though his cover story identified him as a logistics coordinator at Fort Carson. His dark hair was beginning to show silver at the temples, and the lines around his eyes spoke of years spent in dangerous places making impossible decisions. Emma set her backpack down by the door and moved through the apartment's security routine that had become second nature during their 6 months of cohabitation. She checked the small pieces of tape they used to monitor whether anyone had attempted entry during their absence, scanned the sight lines from the windows to identify any new potential surveillance positions, and confirmed that their emergency communication equipment remained undisturbed in its concealed location behind the false back of the hall closet. "How was school today?" Jim asked, his tone carefully casual as he prepared 2 cups of coffee with the kind of measured precision he brought to everything in his life. Emma recognized the question as genuine interest wrapped around professional debriefing. a combination that characterized most of their conversations about her transition to civilian life. Emma accepted the coffee and settled into the chair that gave her the best view of both the front door and the window facing the parking lot. "Interesting," she said, choosing her words carefully. "I think I may have attracted some unwanted attention today." Jim's expression sharpened immediately, his relaxed civilian demeanor shifting into the focused intensity that had made him one of the most respected officers in special operations. "What kind of attention? From who?" Emma described the day's events in the kind of detailed tactical report that Jim would expect, starting with Jake Martinez's request to sit at her lunch table and ending with Madison Wells' carefully worded threats by the lockers. She included her assessment of each player's capabilities, motivations, and likely next moves, presenting the information with the same analytical precision she had once used to brief mission commanders on enemy positions and capabilities. Jim listened without interruption, his coffee growing cold as Emma outlined the social dynamics at Oakwood Regional and the specific challenges posed by Madison's group. When she finished, he was quiet for several minutes, processing the information and considering the implications for their cover and his career. "You understand why this is problematic," he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent years balancing operational security with personal relationships. "Any incident that draws official attention to you could compromise everything we've worked to build here. My position at Fort Carson depends on maintaining our cover, and your future depends on successfully completing high school without creating a record that follows you to college." Emma nodded, though she felt the familiar frustration of being constrained by circumstances beyond her control. "I understand the stakes, Uncle Jim, but these people aren't going to stop just because I ignore them. Madison Wells is conducting a psychological operation against me, and her intelligence gathering suggests she's planning to escalate beyond verbal confrontation." Jim's military experience had included extensive training in irregular warfare and insurgency tactics, so he understood exactly what Emma meant by psychological operations. The fact that she was applying military terminology to high school social dynamics indicated that she was taking the threat seriously, which concerned him more than he was willing to admit. "What's your assessment of their actual capabilities?" he asked, falling back on the professional analysis that had guided them through far more dangerous situations than teenage bullying. Emma considered the question with the same thoroughness she had once applied to evaluating enemy combatants. "Madison Wells is highly intelligent and strategically minded. She understands power dynamics and social manipulation at an advanced level, and she has the resources to sustain a prolonged campaign. Tyler Brooks provides muscle and intimidation but lacks independent thinking. Ashley Kim is the intelligence operative, documenting everything for psychological warfare and social media distribution." Jim recognized the quality of Emma's tactical analysis and found himself impressed despite his concerns about the situation. His niece had learned her lessons well during her years of active service, and her ability to assess threats and develop countermeasures remained as sharp as it had been in actual combat zones. "What about collateral damage?" he asked, using the military term to refer to other students who might be affected by the conflict. "Jake Martinez is already compromised," Emma replied. "My association with him has made him a target, and Madison's group will use him as leverage against me. There may be other students in similar situations, but I haven't had time to complete a full assessment of potential allies or additional targets." The conversation continued for another hour, with Jim asking detailed questions about school, security, administrative oversight, and Emma's options for avoiding or de-escalating the conflict. Emma answered each question with military precision, but she could see that her uncle was struggling with the fundamental disconnect between his desire to protect her and his obligation to maintain their cover. "I need you to promise me something," Jim said finally, his voice carrying the kind of authority that had commanded respect in some of the world's most dangerous places. No matter how bad this gets, no matter what they do to provoke you, you cannot respond with violence. Your training gives you capabilities that could seriously injure or kill someone, and any incident involving force would destroy both our covers and end my career. Emma met his gaze steadily, understanding the weight of what he was asking. I promise I won't initiate violence, she said carefully. But if they escalate to physical assault, I need to be able to defend myself and anyone else they target. Jim considered this distinction for several minutes before nodding slowly. Agreed, but remember that your definition of appropriate force is calibrated for combat against trained enemy soldiers. High school students, even bullies, require a completely different level of response. The rest of the evening passed quietly, with Emma completing her homework while Jim reviewed classified documents that he kept in a secure briefcase chained to his wrist during transport between Fort Carson and their apartment. The domestic routine felt surreal after their tactical discussion of teenage social warfare, but Emma had learned during her military service that the most important battles were often fought in the spaces between official conflicts. Emma's sleep was restless, filled with dreams that mixed memories of actual combat with imagined scenarios of cafeteria confrontations. She woke before dawn with the kind of hyper-vigilant awareness that had once kept her alive in hostile territory. And she knew that her subconscious mind was already preparing for the escalation that seemed inevitable. The next morning at Oakwood Regional began with what appeared to be a coordinated intelligence operation designed to gather additional information about Emma's background and vulnerabilities. Ashley Kim had positioned herself near Emma's locker before school started, documenting everything with her phone while pretending to have an animated conversation with a sophomore girl who kept glancing nervously in Emma's direction. Emma's first period, a P English class, provided temporary sanctuary, but she noticed that Tyler Brooks had taken an unprecedented interest in advanced literature, claiming a desk near the back of the room where he could observe without participating in class discussions. His presence was clearly intended to make Emma uncomfortable, and she had to admit that his psychological warfare was more sophisticated than she had initially assessed. During second period chemistry, Jake Martinez approached their lab table. With obvious apprehension, his usual quiet confidence replaced by the kind of nervous energy that Emma recognized from soldiers who had been marked for special attention by enemy forces. "Emma," he said quietly, keeping his voice below the level that would carry to other lab tables, "I think I should probably find a different partner for today's experiment. Some people have been asking questions about me, and I don't wanna cause problems for you." Emma's tactical assessment of the situation took less than 5 seconds. Jake was being pressured to distance himself from her, which meant that Madison's psychological operation was already affecting her potential allies. Abandoning Jake now would send a clear message that Emma could be intimidated into abandoning anyone who associated with her, effectively isolating her completely. "We're lab partners," Emma said firmly, beginning to set up the equipment for their assigned experiment on chemical reaction rates. Period. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with Mrs. Patterson. Jake's relief was visible, though. Emma could see that he was still worried about the consequences of maintaining their partnership. "Thanks," he said quietly. "I know this probably makes things harder for you, but I appreciate you not throwing me under the bus." Emma found herself thinking about Private Mitchell again, the young communications specialist who had needed protection until he developed the confidence to handle hostile situations on his own. Jake reminded her of Mitchell in ways that went beyond their similar ages and quiet personalities. Both possessed intelligence and integrity that made them valuable allies, but both lacked the aggressive instincts necessary to defend themselves against determined predators. The chemistry experiment proceeded without incident, though Emma was hyper-aware of Tyler's presence in the back of the room and the way Ashley kept appearing in the hallway outside the lab windows. The surveillance was becoming more obvious and more intensive. suggesting that Madison's intelligence gathering phase was nearly complete and that direct action would follow soon. Third period American history brought an unexpected development when Ms. Gonzalez announced that the Cold War presentation assignments would be delivered the following week, with partnerships randomly selected from a hat to ensure diverse perspectives and prevent students from simply working with their established friend groups. Emma found herself paired with Brian Chun, a quiet senior who had been observing the developing situation between Emma and Madison's group with the kind of careful attention that suggested he understood the implications. "I heard about what happened yesterday," Brian said quietly as they moved to a corner of the classroom to discuss their presentation topic. "Madison's crew has been asking around about you, trying to find out where you came from and why you transferred here senior year." Emma's operational security training went into high alert immediately. "What kind of questions?" Brian glanced around to make sure their conversation wouldn't be overheard before responding. "Stuff about your previous school, your family background, why you moved to Riverside. Ashley Kim has been showing people photos she took of your stuff, trying to get someone to recognize your handwriting or your backpack." Emma processed this information with growing concern. Madison's intelligence operation was more thorough than she had anticipated, and the fact that they were conducting background investigations suggested a level of sophistication that approached actual counterintelligence work. If they managed to discover any details about her military service or her uncle's real position at Fort Carson, the consequences could be catastrophic. "Has anyone been able to tell them anything useful?" Emma asked, keeping her voice casual, despite the adrenaline beginning to flood her system. Brian shook his head. "Not that I know of. You've done a good job of staying under the radar. But Madison's dad has connections all over the state, and if she really wants to dig into your background, she probably has the resources to find out more than you'd like." The remainder of the history class was spent outlining their presentation on nuclear deterrence theory, but Emma's mind was focused on the operational security implications of Madison's investigation. If Madison Wells had access to the kind of resources that Brian suggested, Emma's carefully constructed cover identity might not withstand serious scrutiny. Fourth period calculus brought another escalation in the psychological warfare campaign, as Ashley Kim arrived early and claimed the desk directly in front of Emma, positioning herself where she could monitor Emma's every reaction while maintaining plausible deniability about her surveillance activities. Ashley spent the entire class period taking notes on Emma's behavior, documenting everything from her handwriting style to her body language to her responses to Mr. Peterson's questions about advanced mathematical concepts. Emma forced herself to maintain normal behavior patterns, despite the intensive observation, but she could feel her operational instincts screaming warnings about the level of intelligence gathering being conducted against her. Ashley's documentation was systematic and thorough, suggesting that Madison's group was building a comprehensive psychological profile that would be used to identify Emma's vulnerabilities and pressure points. The lunch period represented the most dangerous part of Emma's day, as the cafeteria's open layout and chaotic social dynamics provided multiple opportunities for confrontation while making it difficult for school administrators to monitor all interactions. Emma had considered eating lunch in the library or finding an empty classroom, but she knew that avoiding the cafeteria would be interpreted as retreat and would only encourage further escalation. She claimed her usual table near the emergency exits and began eating her lunch with deliberate calm, though every instinct was telling her to maintain elevated situational awareness. Jake Martinez appeared at her table within minutes, carrying his lunch tray with the careful precision of someone who expected to be targeted at any moment. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, though his expression made it clear that he was hoping Emma would say yes despite the obvious risks. Emma gestured to the empty chair across from her, noting that Jake's presence at her table was immediately noticed by Madison's group at their central position in the cafeteria. Ashley's phone came up immediately, documenting the continuation of their partnership despite the previous day's psychological pressure. "Thanks," Jake said as he settled into the chair. "I know associating with me probably isn't helping your situation, but I appreciate having someone to sit with." Emma found herself studying Jake's face as he spoke, noting the intelligence in his dark eyes and the quiet strength that he kept carefully hidden beneath his unassuming exterior. Jake reminded her of several soldiers she had served alongside, people who possessed valuable skills and unwavering loyalty, but lacked the aggressive personalities that civilian populations often associated with military effectiveness. "Don't worry about it," Emma said, though she was acutely aware that Madison's table had grown quieter as more attention focused on their interaction. "Everyone deserves to eat lunch in peace." The conversation that followed was carefully normal, with Jake expressing appreciation for Emma's partnership in chemistry class and Emma responding with genuine interest in his academic goals and college applications. Jake was planning to study engineering at Colorado State University, with a particular focus on renewable energy systems that could provide power in remote locations. Emma found his technical knowledge impressive and his passion for solving practical problems refreshing after dealing with the social manipulation that characterized most interactions at Oakwood Regional. Their peaceful conversation was interrupted when Madison Wells approached their table with Tyler and Ashley flanking her in the same formation they had used the previous day. Emma's tactical awareness went into high alert immediately, though. She continued eating her sandwich with steady, measured bites while tracking their movement through her peripheral vision. "Jake Martinez," Madison said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet section of the cafeteria with the kind of false warmth that preceded psychological assault. "I've been hoping to have a conversation with you." Jake's reaction was immediate and visible, his shoulders tensing as he looked up to meet Madison's predatory smile. Emma could see that he was afraid, though he was trying to hide his fear behind a mask of polite attention that wouldn't fool anyone with tactical training. "Hi, Madison," Jake said quietly, his voice steady despite the obvious stress he was experiencing. "What can I do for you?" Madison's laugh was perfectly calibrated to suggest that Jake's question was somehow amusing in ways that he couldn't understand. "Oh, Jake, it's not what you can do for me. It's what I can do for you. You see, I've been watching your friendship with Emma here, and I'm concerned that you might not understand what you're getting yourself into." Emma remained motionless, continuing to eat her lunch while analyzing Madison's approach and preparing for whatever psychological manipulation was about to unfold. Madison's positioning placed her directly between Jake and the nearest exit, while Tyler's presence blocked access to the main aisle that led toward the cafeteria supervisors. Ashley stood slightly apart with her phone ready, positioned to document whatever happened next for later distribution through social media channels. "I'm not sure what you mean," Jake said, though his expression suggested that he understood exactly what Madison was implying. Madison's smile became even more predatory as she leaned forward slightly, using her height advantage to create additional psychological pressure. "Emma's new here, Jake. She doesn't understand how things work at Oakwood Regional, and she doesn't understand the consequences of making poor social choices. But you've been here for 3 years. You know better." Emma's assessment of Madison's psychological warfare technique was grudgingly professional. Madison was using Jake's longer history at the school to create social pressure, implying that he was violating established norms by associating with Emma. The technique was designed to make Jake feel responsible for protecting Emma from consequences that Madison's group would create, while simultaneously making him question whether his association with Emma was worth the personal cost. "Emma's a good person," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying more strength than Emma had expected. "She's been a good lab partner and a good friend. I don't see any reason to change that." Tyler stepped closer, using his size to create additional intimidation while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation. "The reason," he said, his voice carrying the kind of casual menace that suggested he was accustomed to using physical presence to resolve disagreements, "is that some friendships come with costs that you might not want to pay." Emma's training had included extensive instruction in threat assessment and de-escalation techniques, but she was rapidly approaching the point where peaceful resolution would become impossible. Tyler's implied threat of physical violence represented a significant escalation from the psychological warfare that had characterized the previous confrontations, and Emma knew that failing to respond appropriately would only encourage further aggression. "Tyler," Emma said quietly, her voice carrying just enough edge to indicate that she was not intimidated by his physical presence. "Is there something specific you wanted to discuss, or are you just here to practice your intimidation techniques on Jake?" The cafeteria around their table had grown noticeably quieter, with nearby students turning their attention to the confrontation while maintaining enough distance to avoid becoming involved. Emma could see several underclassmen pulling out their phones to record whatever happened next, and she knew that any response she made would be documented and analyzed by the entire school population. Madison's expression shifted slightly, as if she hadn't expected Emma to speak up directly, rather than allowing Jake to handle the confrontation on his own. Tyler's reaction was more predictable, his face flushing with anger at being challenged by someone he had clearly expected to remain passive. "I wanted to discuss your attitude problem," Tyler said, his voice rising slightly as his self-control began to slip. "You've been here 3 weeks and you think you can just ignore the way things work around here. That's going to change." Emma set down her sandwich with deliberate precision and looked up to meet Tyler's gaze directly. Her expression remained calm, but something in her eyes must have conveyed information that Tyler wasn't prepared to process, because he took a small step backward despite his obvious anger. "The way things work around here," Emma said, her voice steady and clear enough to carry to the surrounding tables, "seems to involve a lot of people being afraid of you three. That's not how things work where I come from." Ashley's phone was recording everything now, and Emma could see other students doing the same from multiple angles around the cafeteria. Whatever happened next would be preserved permanently and distributed widely, which meant that Emma needed to be very careful about how she responded to the escalating confrontation. Madison recovered her composure quickly, though Emma could see calculation behind her perfectly applied makeup as she processed this unexpected display of resistance. "Where you come from obviously didn't prepare you very well for dealing with real consequences," Madison said, her voice taking on the kind of cold precision that Emma recognized from trained interrogators. "Maybe it's time you got a more comprehensive education." Emma's tactical assessment of the situation took less than 2 seconds. Madison was escalating toward direct confrontation, Tyler was prepared to provide physical intimidation, and Ashley was documenting everything for maximum psychological impact. The confrontation had moved beyond verbal sparring and was approaching the point where Emma would need to choose between backing down and revealing capabilities that would compromise her cover. "I'm always interested in learning new things," Emma said, her voice carrying just enough steel to indicate that she wasn't going to be intimidated by threats. "What exactly did you have in mind?" Madison's smile was beautiful and absolutely ruthless. "Meet us behind the cafeteria after school today. We'll show you how things really work at Oakwood Regional, and you can decide whether you want to keep making poor choices about your associations." The challenge was delivered with perfect deniability, phrased as an invitation rather than a threat, but everyone within hearing distance understood exactly what Madison was proposing. Emma was being called out for a confrontation that would determine her status in the school's social hierarchy, and her response would affect not only her own future but Jake's safety as well. Emma looked around the cafeteria at the faces watching their interaction, noting the mixture of fear, excitement, and anticipation that characterized the audience for this psychological theater. She thought about her uncle's warnings about maintaining cover about the importance of avoiding incidents that might compromise their operational security. She thought about Private Mitchell and the other soldiers she had protected during her military service, and about Jake Martinez, who was sitting across from her with obvious fear but refusing to abandon their friendship despite the personal cost. "I'll be there," Emma said quietly, her voice carrying across the silent cafeteria with the kind of finality that ended negotiations and began preparations for battle. Madison's triumphant smile suggested that she believed she had won something important, but Emma could see uncertainty in Ashley's expression, and something that might have been concern in Tyler's eyes. They had gotten the confrontation they wanted, but Emma's calm acceptance of their challenge had not produced the fear or desperation they had expected. As Madison's group walked away from the table, Emma found herself surrounded by the kind of electric tension that preceded significant combat operations. Students throughout the cafeteria were already spreading the news of the after-school confrontation, and Emma knew that by the end of the day, everyone at Oakwood Regional would know that the quiet new girl had accepted Madison Wells' challenge. Jake remained at the table, his face pale but his expression determined. "Emma," he said quietly, "you don't have to do this because of me. I can handle whatever they throw at me." Emma looked at Jake's earnest face and thought about all the good soldiers she had served alongside, people who possessed courage and integrity, but lacked the specific training necessary to survive in hostile environments. Jake was one of those people, someone worth protecting, even if it meant compromising her own operational security. "Yes, I do," Emma said simply. "Some things are worth fighting for." The remainder of the lunch period passed in tense quiet, with Emma and Jake finishing their meals while surrounded by the kind of charged atmosphere that preceded significant conflicts. Emma's mind was already shifting into pre-combat mode, analyzing the tactical implications of the after-school confrontation, and considering her limited options for responding to whatever Madison's group had planned. Fifth period brought advanced placement physics with Dr. Sarah Chun, a brilliant teacher who had earned her doctorate from MIT before choosing to dedicate her career to high school education. Emma usually enjoyed Dr. Chen's classes, finding comfort in the predictable behavior of physical laws and mathematical relationships that governed everything from planetary motion to subatomic interactions. Today's lesson focused on momentum and energy transfer in collision systems, concepts that Emma understood from both theoretical study and practical application during her military training. Dr. Chen's explanation of how force vectors combined to produce resultant motion reminded Emma of the physics involved in hand-to-hand combat, though she was careful to keep her responses appropriately academic rather than revealing her personal experience with applying kinetic energy to human targets. The class period proceeded normally until Ashley Kim arrived 20 minutes late with another elaborate excuse about student council responsibilities that required her immediate attention. Emma's situational awareness went into high gear as Ashley claimed an empty desk with a clear view of Emma's position, though this time Ashley made no attempt to hide her surveillance activities. Ashley spent the remainder of the physics class openly staring at Emma, taking notes that had nothing to do with momentum calculations and energy conservation laws. Emma could feel Ashley's eyes tracking her every movement and reaction, gathering final intelligence before the afternoon confrontation that Madison had arranged. Dr. Chun noticed Ashley's behavior and made several pointed comments about the importance of focusing on academic material rather than social distractions, but Ashley ignored the warnings with the kind of casual disrespect that suggested she was confident about her protection from administrative consequences. When the final bell rang, Emma packed her belongings with the same methodical precision she had once used to prepare equipment before dangerous missions. Ashley hurried out of the classroom ahead of her, undoubtedly rushing to report her final observations to Madison and Tyler before the after-school confrontation. Emma's walk to her locker took her through hallways buzzing with anticipation and nervous energy. Word of the challenge had spread throughout the school with the speed that only high school gossip could achieve, and Emma could feel hundreds of eyes tracking her movement as students whispered excitedly about the upcoming showdown between the quiet new girl and Madison Wells' crew. Jake Martinez was waiting by Emma's locker, his expression mixing concern with determination in ways that reminded Emma of young soldiers preparing for their first combat mission. "Emma," he said quietly, "I know you told Madison you'd be there, but you could still just leave. Go home, tell your uncle what happened, let the adults handle it." Emma considered Jake's suggestion, while exchanging her afternoon textbooks for the few personal items she wanted to secure before the confrontation. The rational choice would be to walk away, to report the incident to school administrators, and let the official system handle Madison's group through proper channels. But Emma's experience had taught her that some situations required direct action, and her assessment of Madison Wells suggested that administrative intervention would only delay rather than resolve the fundamental conflict. "I can't do that." "Jake," Emma said, closing her locker with quiet finality, "if I back down now, Madison will know she can intimidate me into abandoning anyone who associates with me. That's not the kind of person I want to be." Jake nodded slowly, though Emma could see that he was still worried about the consequences of the confrontation. "Then I'm coming with you," he said, his voice carrying more determination than Emma had expected. "If this is happening because of me, I should be there." Emma's tactical assessment of Jake's proposal took less than 5 seconds. Jake's presence would complicate the situation by providing Madison's group with an additional target for psychological warfare, but it would also demonstrate to the school population that Emma's friends weren't going to be intimidated into abandoning her. The symbolic value of Jake's support might outweigh the tactical disadvantages of his presence. "All right," Emma said, "but stay back and let me handle whatever they have planned. This isn't your fight." Jake's expression suggested that he disagreed with Emma's assessment, but he nodded his acceptance of her conditions. Together, they walked toward the back of the school where Madison had specified the confrontation would take place, surrounded by the kind of electric tension that preceded significant battles. The area behind the cafeteria was exactly the kind of location that Emma would have chosen for a clandestine operation, isolated from direct administrative supervision, partially concealed by dumpsters and loading equipment, but open enough to accommodate the audience that would inevitably gather to witness the confrontation. Emma's tactical analysis identified multiple escape routes and potential weapons, though she hoped that Madison's planned humiliation would remain psychological rather than escalating to actual violence. Madison, Tyler, and Ashley were already waiting when Emma and Jake arrived, positioned near the large dumpster that served the school cafeteria in a formation that blocked the most direct path back to the main building. Emma noted that they had chosen their ground carefully, creating a natural arena that would contain whatever they had planned, while providing good visibility for the audience that was already beginning to gather. Students emerged from the school building in small groups, maintaining enough distance to avoid direct involvement, while positioning themselves where they could observe and record whatever happened next. Emma could see dozens of phone cameras already active, documenting her arrival and preparing to capture whatever humiliation Madison had designed. Madison's appearance was perfect as always, her designer clothes and flawless makeup creating the impression of someone who had never faced real consequences for her actions. Tyler stood beside her with the kind of aggressive confidence that suggested he was looking forward to whatever they had planned, while Ashley positioned herself with her professional quality camera equipment, ready to document Emma's downfall from multiple angles. "Emma Rodriguez," Madison called out, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd with theatrical precision. "I'm so glad you decided to join us for your education and how things really work at Oakwood Regional." Emma walked forward with measured steps, her posture reflecting years of military training, while her expression remained calm despite the adrenaline flooding her system. She could feel the crowd's anticipation building as she approached the confrontation that everyone expected would end with her humiliation and social destruction. "I'm here," Emma said simply, her voice steady and clear. "What exactly did you want to teach me?" Madison's smile was radiant and absolutely predatory as she gestured toward the large dumpster behind her. "Well, since you seem to enjoy associating with garbage like Jake Martinez, we thought you should have a more authentic experience with where that kind of friendship leads." Emma's tactical assessment of the situation crystallized immediately. Madison intended to force her into the dumpster, creating the same kind of degrading spectacle that would destroy her social standing while providing content for viral social media distribution. The plan was sophisticated and cruel, designed to achieve maximum psychological impact while maintaining enough plausibility to avoid serious administrative consequences. Tyler stepped forward, using his size to create physical intimidation, while Ashley moved to get better camera angles for documenting Emma's expected humiliation. The crowd of watching students pressed closer, sensing that the confrontation was approaching its climax. Emma looked at the dumpster, then at Madison's triumphant expression, then at the dozens of phones recording her every reaction. She thought about her uncle's warnings about maintaining cover, about the importance of avoiding incidents that might compromise their operational security. She thought about Jake Martinez standing behind her, refusing to abandon their friendship, despite the personal cost. She thought about Private Mitchell and all the other good people she had protected during her military service. And she realized that some promises were more important than others. "No," Emma said quietly, her voice carrying across the silent crowd with absolute finality. Madison's expression flickered with surprise, as if she hadn't expected direct refusal rather than pleading or attempts at negotiation. "Excuse me?" Emma's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, her weight distributing in ways that would have been familiar to anyone with combat training, but appeared casual to civilian observers. "I said no. I'm not getting in your dumpster, and I'm not going to let you or anyone else treat my friends like garbage." Tyler moved forward aggressively, clearly prepared to use physical force to complete Madison's planned humiliation. "I don't think you understand how this works," he said, reaching out to grab Emma's arm with the confidence of someone who had never encountered serious resistance. Emma's response was swift, precise, and completely devastating. Tyler's hand never reached her arm, intercepted by defensive techniques that redirected his momentum and sent him stumbling backward into the dumpster with a crash that echoed across the stunned crowd. The movement was so fluid and economical that most observers didn't even understand what they had witnessed. The silence that followed Tyler's impact with the metal dumpster was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the electronic beeping of dozens of phones still recording the confrontation. Emma stood exactly where she had been before Tyler's attack, her expression calm and her breathing steady, as if redirecting a 200-pound quarterback into a dumpster required no more effort than swatting away a fly. Madison's perfectly composed facade cracked for the first time since Emma had known her, genuine shock replacing calculated cruelty as she stared at Tyler's sprawled form among the cafeteria waste. Ashley's professional documentation faltered as she tried to process what her camera had just recorded, her usual social media confidence replaced by confusion and growing fear. Emma looked around at the assembled crowd, noting the mixture of amazement, fear, and excitement on the faces of her classmates. Then she looked directly at Madison Wells, her voice carrying clearly across the silent crowd. "Now," Emma said quietly, "let's discuss how things are really going to work at Oakwood Regional." Tyler Brooks pulled himself out of the dumpster with considerably less grace than he had possessed before attempting to grab Emma Rodriguez. Remnants of cafeteria waste clung to his Letterman jacket, and his carefully styled hair now bore traces of mystery substances that he preferred not to identify. The quarterback who had terrorized Oakwood Regional's hallways for 3 years looked Around at the assembled crowd with the bewildered expression of someone whose fundamental understanding of reality had just been violently readjusted. Emma remained motionless in the exact position she had occupied before Tyler's failed assault, her breathing steady and her posture relaxed despite having just demonstrated combat capabilities that defied every assumption her classmates had made about the quiet transfer student. The defensive maneuver that had sent Tyler sprawling had been executed with such fluid precision that many observers were still trying to process exactly what they had witnessed. Madison Wells stood frozen beside the dumpster, her perfect composure finally cracking as she stared at Tyler's humiliating predicament. For someone who had built her entire identity around controlling social situations through calculated manipulation, the sight of her primary enforcer being casually dispatched by their intended victim represented a fundamental challenge to her worldview. Ashley Kim's phone trembled in her hands as she struggled to maintain her documentation of events that had departed so dramatically from their carefully planned script. The social media content that was supposed to showcase Emma's public humiliation had instead captured Tyler Brooks being effortlessly neutralized by someone who moved with the kind of lethal economy that suggested extensive combat training. The crowd of students maintained their respectful distance, but Emma could feel the shift in their collective energy as word spread through the assembled observers about what they had just witnessed. Phone cameras continued recording from multiple angles, ensuring that Tyler's encounter with the dumpster would achieve the kind of viral distribution that Madison had originally intended for Emma's degradation. Jake Martinez stepped forward from his position behind Emma, his expression mixing amazement with growing concern about the escalating situation. "Emma," he said quietly, his voice carrying just enough to reach her without being overheard by the surrounding crowd. "Maybe we should go before this gets any worse." Emma's tactical assessment of the situation indicated that Jake's suggestion had merit from an operational security perspective, but her military experience had taught her that retreating after gaining tactical advantage often allowed enemies to regroup and plan more effective counterattacks. Madison Wells was not the type of adversary who would accept defeat gracefully, and leaving now would only provide her with time to develop more sophisticated responses to Emma's unexpected capabilities. "Not yet," Emma replied, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that had once commanded respect from seasoned special operations personnel. She looked directly at Madison, noting the calculation behind the shock in her blue eyes. "Madison, and I still need to finish our conversation about how things work at Oakwood Regional." Madison's recovery was swift and professionally impressive, her practiced social mask sliding back into place despite the dramatic failure of her psychological operation. "That was quite a performance, Emma," she said, her voice maintaining its customary warmth despite the unmistakable edge of hostility beneath the surface. "I had no idea you were so talented at physical activities." Emma recognized Madison's attempt to reframe the confrontation as a planned demonstration rather than acknowledging Tyler's humiliating defeat, but she also understood that Madison's quick recovery indicated a level of strategic thinking that made her genuinely dangerous. Lesser bullies might have been intimidated by Emma's display of combat skills, but Madison Wells was already adapting her approach to account for this new information. "I've had some training," Emma said simply, deliberately understating her capabilities while maintaining eye contact with Madison. "Enough to handle situations like this one." Tyler finally extracted himself completely from the dumpster, his face flushed with embarrassment and growing anger as he became aware of the dozens of phones documenting his predicament. Food scraps and unidentifiable liquids had stained his previously pristine uniform, and the carefully maintained image that had been central to his social dominance lay in ruins around him like the debris from his collision with the metal container. "You got lucky," Tyler said, his voice carrying more defensiveness than conviction as he attempted to salvage some dignity from the encounter. "I wasn't ready for you to actually fight back." Emma's expression remained calm, But something in her eyes must have communicated information that Tyler wasn't prepared to process, because he took an involuntary step backward despite his obvious desire to reassert his physical dominance. Emma's assessment of Tyler's combat capabilities had been accurate, dangerous due to size and aggression, but lacking the training or intelligence necessary to adapt when his intimidation tactics failed. "Next time," Emma said quietly, her voice carrying clearly across the silent crowd, "don't grab people without their permission. It rarely ends the way you expect." The simple statement carried implications that went far beyond the immediate confrontation, addressing not only Tyler's failed assault, but the broader pattern of behavior that had allowed Madison's group to terrorize other students through physical intimidation and psychological warfare. Emma's response had been proportional and defensive rather than aggressive, but it had also demonstrated capabilities that fundamentally altered the power dynamic at Oakwood Regional. Madison stepped closer to Tyler, ostensibly offering support, but actually positioning herself where she could better assess Emma's body language and reactions. Emma noted that Madison's approach was more cautious than her previous interactions, suggesting that she was beginning to understand that Emma represented a different category of opponent than the typical high school students she was accustomed to manipulating. "This has been very educational," Madison said, her tone suggesting that she was attempting to regain control of the narrative despite the dramatic failure of her planned humiliation. "I think we've all learned something important about assumptions and appearances today." Emma recognized Madison's verbal maneuvering as an attempt to declare a tactical draw rather than acknowledging defeat. But she also understood that Madison's ego and social position would require some form of retaliation for the public failure of her psychological operation. The confrontation was ending, but the larger conflict was far from resolved. "I'm glad we could clear things up," Emma replied, her voice maintaining the same calm professionalism that had characterized her responses throughout the encounter. "I hope this helps everyone understand that some people prefer to be left alone, to focus on their studies and friendships." Ashley Kim finally lowered her phone, though Emma could see that she was already reviewing the footage she had captured with the kind of intense focus that suggested she was planning how to weaponize the documentation for future psychological warfare operations. Ashley's role as Madison's intelligence operative made her potentially more dangerous than Tyler, whose straightforward aggression was easier to predict and counter. The crowd of students began to disperse slowly, their excited conversations carrying across the area behind the cafeteria as they processed what they had witnessed and prepared to spread the news throughout Oakwood Regional social networks. Emma could hear fragments of speculation about her background and training, theories that ranged from martial arts experience to military service, to completely fictional explanations involving secret government programs. Jake Martinez remained close to Emma's position, his expression mixing relief with growing concern about the long-term consequences of the confrontation. "Emma," he said quietly, "that was incredible, but Madison's not going to let this go. She's going to want revenge for what happened to Tyler." Emma's assessment of Madison's character suggested that Jake's concerns were well-founded, but her military experience had taught her that appearing weak after demonstrating strength often encouraged more aggressive attacks than maintaining a position of confident readiness. Madison Wells would indeed seek retaliation, but backing down now would only convince her that Emma's display of capability had been an aberration rather than a warning. "I know," Emma replied, watching as Madison's group began their own strategic withdrawal toward the main school building. "But some things are worth the risk." The walk back to the parking lot provided Emma with time to process the tactical implications of the confrontation and consider her options for dealing with the inevitable escalation that would follow. Tyler's humiliating defeat had been captured by dozens of phone cameras, ensuring that the footage would spread throughout the school's social networks and beyond. Madison's carefully maintained image of invincibility had been publicly challenged. creating pressure for her to respond with increased aggression to maintain her social dominance. Emma's operational security had been compromised to some degree, as her defensive capabilities were now known to Madison's group and would soon be known to the entire school population. The rumors and speculation about her background would inevitably reach adult attention, possibly including school administrators who might investigate her transfer records and family situation. Jake walked beside her in thoughtful silence, occasionally glancing at Emma with the kind of amazed respect that soldiers showed after witnessing exceptional performance under pressure. When they reached Emma's modest sedan in the student parking lot, he finally spoke up with the question that Emma had been expecting. "Where did you learn to do that?" Jake asked, his voice carrying genuine curiosity mixed with growing understanding. That Emma Rodriguez was far more than she appeared to be. That wasn't just self-defense class stuff. That was something else entirely. Emma considered her response carefully, balancing honesty with operational security requirements. Jake had earned some explanation through his loyalty and courage, but revealing details about her military service would compromise not only her own cover, but potentially her uncle's career and their entire, carefully constructed civilian identity. "My uncle taught me some things," Emma said, which was technically accurate while omitting the crucial details about Colonel Rodriguez's special operations background and her own years of active military service. "He believes everyone should know how to protect themselves." Jake nodded slowly, though his expression suggested that he suspected there were significant details being omitted from Emma's explanation. "Your uncle sounds like a smart man. Most people who learn self-defense don't move like that, though. You looked like you'd done it before, under real pressure." Emma's assessment of Jake's intelligence and observational skills rose another notch, as his comment demonstrated understanding of the difference between classroom training and actual combat experience. Jake Martinez was proving to be more perceptive than his quiet demeanor suggested, which made him both a valuable ally and a potential security risk if he became too curious about Emma's background. "Practice makes perfect," Emma said simply, unlocking her car door while maintaining awareness of the other students leaving the parking lot around them. Many were staring openly at her now, their expressions mixing fear, respect, and intense curiosity about the transfer student who had just redefined the social dynamics at Oakwood Regional. The drive home provided Emma with solitude to consider how she would explain the day's events to her uncle without triggering the kind of security concerns that might force them to relocate again. Colonel Rodriguez's primary worry had been about incidents that would attract official attention to their cover identities, and Tyler Brooks being thrown into a dumpster in front of dozens of witnesses definitely qualified as the kind of public spectacle that could compromise their operational security. Emma's apartment complex appeared peaceful when she arrived, with no signs of surveillance or unusual activity that might indicate their cover had been blown by the school confrontation. She parked in her designated space and sat for several minutes in the driver's seat, mentally rehearsing different approaches to briefing her uncle about the escalating situation at Oakwood Regional. Colonel Rodriguez was waiting in the kitchen when Emma entered the apartment, his expression immediately shifting from casual interest to professional concern as he read her body language and stress indicators. Years of leading special operations teams had given him the ability to assess his subordinates' mental states at a glance, and Emma's carefully controlled tension told him that significant events had occurred since their conversation the previous evening. "How was your day?" Jim asked, though his tone indicated that he was preparing for a tactical briefing rather than casual conversation about high school social dynamics. Emma set her backpack down and moved through their security routine automatically, checking for signs of unauthorized entry while organizing her thoughts about how to present the day's developments. "Complicated," she said finally, settling into her usual chair with sightlines to both the door and window. "The situation escalated faster than I anticipated." Jim's expression sharpened immediately, his relaxed civilian demeanor shifting into the focused intensity that had made him one of the military's most respected special operations commanders. Define escalated. Are we talking about increased verbal harassment, or did someone cross the line into physical confrontation? Emma described the day's events in the kind of detailed after-action report that Jim would expect, starting with Ashley Kim's intelligence gathering operations and ending with Tyler Brooks' failed assault and subsequent encounter with the dumpster. She included her assessment of Madison's strategic capabilities, Tyler's predictable aggression, and Ashley's role as the group's documentation specialist. Jim listened without interruption, his coffee growing cold as Emma outlined the tactical situation at Oakwood Regional and the specific challenges posed by Madison's sophisticated psychological warfare campaign. When she finished her report, he was quiet for several minutes, processing the information and considering the implications for their cover and his military career. "You understand that this changes everything," Jim said finally, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent years balancing operational requirements with personal relationships. "Your capabilities are now known to dozens of students, which means rumors about your background will spread throughout the school and potentially reach administrative attention." Emma nodded, though she felt no regret about her decision to respond to Tyler's assault with appropriate defensive force. "I understand the risks, Uncle Jim, but Tyler grabbed me first, and I used minimal force necessary to stop his attack. Everything I did was legally justified self-defense." Jim's military experience included extensive training in rules of engagement and proportional response, so he understood that Emma's defensive actions had been both legally appropriate and tactically sound. The problem wasn't with her response to physical assault, but with the operational security implications of revealing capabilities that would inevitably generate questions about her background and training. "The legal justification isn't my primary concern," Jim said, though his tone indicated pride in Emma's tactical decision-making despite his worries about the consequences. "I'm worried about curiosity. Students are going to want to know where you learned those skills. Teachers are going to notice the change in how your classmates treat you, and administrators might start investigating your transfer records." Emma had been considering the same operational security concerns during her drive home, and she knew that her uncle's assessment was accurate. Her demonstration of combat capabilities had fundamentally altered her position at Oakwood Regional, creating visibility that conflicted with their strategy of maintaining low profiles until Emma graduated and could begin the next phase of her civilian transition. "What are options?" Emma asked, falling back on the professional analysis that had guided them through more dangerous situations than high school social dynamics. Jim considered the question with the same thoroughness he had once applied to planning classified military operations. "We could request another transfer, move you to a different school district where you could start over with a clean slate. Fort Carson has enough influence to arrange something quickly and quietly." Emma's reaction to the suggestion was immediate and negative, though she tried to keep her response professionally measured. Running away would send the wrong message to Madison's group, and it would abandon Jake Martinez and anyone else they're targeting. "That's not the kind of person I want to be." Jim recognized the quality of leadership and protective instincts that had made Emma such an effective special operations soldier, but he also knew that those same qualities could create problems in civilian situations where the rules of engagement were less clearly defined. "Your protective instincts are admirable," Jim said carefully, "but your primary mission right now is successfully completing high school and transitioning to civilian life. Getting involved in other people's conflicts could compromise that mission." Emma understood her uncle's reasoning, but she also knew that some principles were more important than mission parameters. Jake Martinez had shown her loyalty and friendship when it would have been safer to distance himself from her, and abandoning him now would violate everything her military service had taught her about the responsibilities that came with superior capabilities. "Jake stuck by me when it would have been easier to walk away," Emma said quietly. "I can't abandon him just because protecting him might be inconvenient for our cover." The conversation continued for another hour, with Jim exploring different approaches to managing the situation while Emma outlined her assessment of the threats and opportunities created by the day's confrontation. Eventually, they reached a compromise that balanced operational security concerns with Emma's determination to complete her senior year at Oakwood Regional. Jim would monitor the situation closely, using his connections at Fort Carson to track any official interest in Emma's background or family situation. Emma would maintain her cover story about learning self-defense from her uncle while being more cautious about displaying her full capabilities. If the situation escalated beyond what they could manage quietly, they would reassess their options and consider relocation. The remainder of the evening passed quietly, with Emma completing her homework while Jim reviewed classified documents that required his attention before the next day's briefings at Fort Carson. The domestic routine felt surreal after their tactical discussion of high school social warfare, but Emma had learned during her military service that the most important battles were often fought in the spaces between official conflicts. Emma's sleep was restless, filled with dreams that mixed memories of actual combat operations with imagined scenarios involving Madison Wells and her sophisticated revenge campaigns. She woke before dawn with the kind of hyper-vigilant awareness that had once kept her alive in hostile territory, and she knew that her subconscious mind was already preparing for the escalation that seemed inevitable. The next morning at Oakwood Regional began with a dramatically altered social environment that reflected Emma's changed status in the school's complex hierarchy. Students who had previously ignored her existence now watched her movements with the kind of respectful attention usually reserved for celebrities or natural disasters. Conversations paused when she walked past, and she could feel dozens of eyes tracking her progress through the hallways with mixtures of fear, respect, and intense curiosity. Her first period, a P. English class, provided a perfect example of how quickly social dynamics could shift when power balances were altered. Students who had never acknowledged her presence now offered tentative smiles and nervous greetings, while others maintained careful distance as if proximity to Emma might somehow involve them in whatever conflict was developing between her and Madison's group. Mr. Davidson, the earnest young English teacher, noticed the changed atmosphere immediately and made several pointed comments about focusing on literature rather than social distractions. But his efforts to maintain normal classroom dynamics were complicated by the underlying tension that Emma's presence now generated. During the discussion of heroism in wartime literature, Emma found herself fielding more direct questions about her perspectives on courage and moral complexity than she had received during her entire previous month at Oakwood Regional. Her carefully worded responses about anonymous acts of service and the responsibility that came with capability earned approving nods from Mr. Davidson and intense attention from classmates, who were clearly trying to gather additional information about her background and experience. Second period chemistry with Jake Martinez provided the first real test of how their friendship would survive the previous day's dramatic confrontation. Jake approached their lab table with obvious nervousness, his usual quiet confidence replaced by the kind of uncertain energy that suggested he was struggling to process everything he had witnessed. "Good morning, Emma," Jake said as he settled into his chair, his voice carrying a mixture of respect and concern that hadn't been present in their previous interactions. "How are you feeling after yesterday?" Emma appreciated Jake's straightforward approach to addressing the change dynamic between them, though she was also aware that their conversation was being monitored by several other students who were clearly hoping to overhear details about the confrontation behind the cafeteria. "I'm fine," Emma replied, beginning to set up the equipment for their assigned experiment on reaction kinetics. "How about you? I hope yesterday didn't cause problems for you with anyone." Jake's expression suggested that Emma's concern was well-founded, though he was trying to minimize whatever social consequences he had experienced for maintaining their friendship despite Madison's psychological pressure campaigns. "A few people have been asking questions," Jake admitted quietly, keeping his voice below the level that would carry to other lab tables. "Mostly they want to know if I knew you had training, and whether you've talked about your background or your family." Emma's operational security instincts went into high alert immediately, though she maintained her calm exterior while processing the implications of Jake's report. The curiosity about her background was spreading beyond idle speculation and moving toward active investigation, which could potentially compromise her cover story and create problems for her uncle's military career. "What have you told them?" Emma asked, though her tone remained conversational despite the tactical importance of Jake's response. Jake met her gaze steadily, his dark eyes reflecting the kind of loyalty that Emma had learned to value during her military service. "I told them that you're a good person who deserves to be left alone to focus on your studies. If they want to know more about you, they should try being your friend instead of treating you like a curiosity." Emma felt a surge of gratitude for Jake's protective response, though she was also concerned about the potential consequences of his loyalty if Madison's group decided to escalate their psychological warfare to include targeting Jake more aggressively. "Thanks," Emma said simply, understanding that Jake's support came with personal risks that he was choosing to accept despite having safer alternatives. "That means a lot." The chemistry experiment proceeded smoothly, with Emma and Jake maintaining their established working relationship while navigating the changed social dynamics that surrounded their partnership. Other students continued to steal glances at their table, clearly hoping to observe interactions that might provide insights into Emma's personality or background. Mrs. Patterson, the no-nonsense chemistry teacher, noticed the increased attention focused on Emma and Jake's table and made several pointed comments about focusing on molecular behavior rather than social speculation. But her efforts to maintain normal classroom dynamics were only partially successful. When the bell rang signaling the end of second period, Emma and Jake packed their equipment with the same methodical precision that had characterized their previous collaborations, though both were hyper-aware of the audience that their simple partnership now commanded. Third period American history with Miss Gonzalez brought an unexpected development when Emma discovered that her presentation partner, Brian Chun, had requested a private conversation before class began. Brian approached Emma's desk with the kind of careful neutrality that suggested he was trying to balance curiosity with respect for her obvious desire for privacy. "Emma," Brian said quietly, positioning himself where their conversation wouldn't be easily overheard by other students, who were clearly hoping to gather additional information about Emma's background and capabilities. "I wanted to talk to you about something that happened after school yesterday." Emma's situational awareness immediately focused on Brian's serious expression and cautious body language, recognizing signs that indicated he possessed information that might be tactically significant for her ongoing conflict with Madison's group. "What happened?" Emma asked, though her tone remained carefully neutral despite her growing concern about what Brian might have witnessed or discovered. Brian glanced around the classroom to ensure their conversation would remain private before responding with information that confirmed Emma's worst operational security fears. "My little sister goes to the middle school next door, and she saw Madison Wells and Ashley Kim there yesterday afternoon, talking to some of the 8th grade students who used to go to elementary school with you." Emma's blood pressure spiked immediately as she processed the implications of Brian's intelligence report. Madison's investigation into her background had expanded beyond Oakwood Regional and was now actively pursuing information from Emma's previous schools and communities, which could potentially uncover details about her military service and her uncle's real position at Fort Carson. "Did your sister overhear what they were asking about?" Emma asked, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to flood her system. Brian nodded grimly, his expression reflecting understanding of the serious implications of Madison's expanded intelligence operation. They were asking about your family, where you lived before moving to Riverside, and whether anyone remembered you talking about military stuff or having unusual skills. Emma's tactical assessment of the situation crystallized immediately into a comprehensive threat analysis that included not only her personal operational security, but potentially her uncle's military career and their entire carefully constructed civilian identity. Madison Wells was conducting the kind of thorough background investigation that could uncover classified information if she had access to the right resources and connections. The remainder of the history class passed intense focus as Emma considered her limited options for dealing with Madison's escalating intelligence operations, while Ms. Gonzalez led a discussion about Cold War espionage that felt uncomfortably relevant to Emma's current situation. When the bell rang, Emma knew that the conflict with Madison's group had moved beyond high school social dynamics and into territory that could have serious consequences for national security. The walk to fourth period calculus took Emma through hallways that now felt like a battlefield where every conversation might contain intelligence. Gathering operations and every friendly interaction might be motivated by curiosity about her background rather than genuine social interest. The changed dynamics at Oakwood Regional were creating exactly the kind of attention that she and her uncle had worked so carefully to avoid. As Emma settled into her seat for Mr. Peterson's lesson on advanced integration techniques, she realized that Madison Wells had just escalated their conflict beyond anything that could be resolved through high school channels. If Madison's investigation continued, it would inevitably reach adult attention and potentially compromise classified information that could affect national security. Emma's decision crystallized with the same clarity that had guided her through combat operations. The time for defensive measures had passed, and the situation now required direct action to protect not only herself and Jake Martinez, but the operational security that dozens of other military families depended on for their safety and effectiveness. Madison Wells had chosen to make this personal. Now Emma Rodriguez was going to show her exactly what that meant. Emma Rodriguez's opportunity for direct action came sooner than expected, during the lunch period when Madison Wells made her most critical tactical error. Ashley Kim had spent the morning documenting Emma's interactions with unprecedented thoroughness, but her intelligence gathering had become so obvious that even the most socially oblivious students were beginning to notice the surveillance operation being conducted against their classmate. The cafeteria buzzed with an undercurrent of anticipation that Emma recognized from pre-combat environments, where everyone sensed that significant events were approaching, but couldn't predict exactly when or how they would unfold. Students clustered in small groups, their conversations filled with speculation about Emma's background and theories about what Madison's next move might be in their escalating conflict. Emma claimed her usual table near the emergency exits, noting that the surrounding area had cleared more dramatically than usual as students instinctively avoided proximity to whatever confrontation seemed inevitable. Jake Martinez approached with his lunch tray, his expression mixing determination with obvious concern about the charged atmosphere that surrounded Emma's presence. "The whole school feels like it's holding its breath," Jake observed as he settled into the chair across from Emma, his voice quiet enough to avoid being overheard by the students, who were clearly straining to catch every word of their conversation. Emma nodded, her tactical awareness cataloging the positions and behavior patterns of everyone within her visual range while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation. "Madison's planning something big," she said, keeping her voice low while tracking Ashley Kim's movement through the cafeteria with her peripheral vision. "Her intelligence operation has been too intensive for just routine harassment." Jake followed Emma's gaze toward Ashley, who was positioned near the serving line with her professional camera equipment ready, and her attention focused entirely on Emma's table. "What do you think she's waiting for?" Emma's question was answered within minutes as Madison Wells entered the cafeteria with an entourage that extended far beyond her usual inner circle. Tyler Brooks flanked her right side, his earlier humiliation apparently forgotten in favor of whatever redemption scenario Madison had constructed for him. But the real surprise was the collection of adults who accompanied Madison's group: her mother, Mrs. Catherine Wells from the school board, Principal Dr. Chun, and two men in expensive suits who carried themselves with the kind of authority that suggested legal or investigative backgrounds. The entire cafeteria fell silent as this unprecedented assembly moved through the serving area with the kind of coordinated precision that Emma recognized from official operations. Students scrambled to clear pathways and find vantage points for observing whatever confrontation was about to unfold, their phones emerging automatically to document the most dramatic social event in Oakwood Regional's recent history. Emma's tactical assessment of the situation crystallized immediately into a comprehensive threat analysis that included not only the immediate confrontation, but the broader implications for her operational security and her uncle's military career. Madison had escalated beyond high school social dynamics and was now leveraging adult authority and potentially legal channels to pursue her campaign against Emma. "Emma Rodriguez," Principal Dr. Chun called out, his voice carrying across the silent cafeteria with official authority that commanded immediate attention from every student and staff member present. "Could you please come with us? We need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to our attention." Emma exchanged a quick glance with Jake, whose expression reflected the same recognition that this confrontation had moved beyond anything they could handle through peer-to-peer conflict resolution. The presence of Mrs. Wells and the unidentified men in suits suggested that Madison's investigation had uncovered information that was now being pursued through official channels. "Of course," Emma replied, standing with the same calm professionalism that had characterized her responses throughout the escalating conflict. She walked toward the assembled group with measured steps, her posture reflecting years of military training, while her expression remained neutral despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Madison's smile was triumphant as Emma approached, though something in Emma's steady gaze seemed to give her momentary pause. Ashley positioned herself with her camera equipment, ready to document whatever revelation or confrontation Madison had orchestrated, while Tyler maintained his position as physical backup, despite his previous humiliating encounter with Emma's defensive capabilities. Mrs. Catherine Wells stepped forward with the kind of authoritative presence that came from years of wielding influence through school board politics and community connections. She was an elegant woman in her 40s with perfectly styled blonde hair and expensive clothing that immediately identified her as someone accustomed to getting her way through a combination of wealth and social position. "Miss Rodriguez," Mrs. Wells said, her voice carrying across the silent cafeteria with theatrical precision designed to maximize the impact of whatever accusation she was preparing to make. "My daughter has brought some very serious concerns to my attention regarding your behavior and background here at Oakwood Regional." Emma's operational security training immediately recognized this as a formal interrogation disguised as administrative procedure, designed to pressure her into revealing information that could be used against her and potentially her uncle. The presence of the unidentified men suggested that Madison's investigation had reached levels that could compromise classified information. "I'm happy to address any concerns you might have," Emma replied, her voice steady and professional despite the tactical significance of whatever information Madison believed she had discovered. One of the men in suits stepped forward, his credentials case already open to display identification that made Emma's blood pressure spike immediately. "Special Agent Michael Torres, Department of Defense Criminal Investigation Command, with authority." to investigate security breaches involving military personnel and classified information. Miss Rodriguez, Agent Torres said, his voice carrying the kind of formal authority that Emma recognized from military legal proceedings. We need to discuss some discrepancies in your enrollment records and questions about your family's background that have come to our attention through unofficial channels. Emma's mind raced through the implications of seat involvement while maintaining her calm exterior. Madison's investigation had somehow triggered official interest in Emma's background, potentially compromising not only her own cover, but the operational security of her uncle's classified assignments and the safety of other military families who depended on similar cover arrangements. Madison stepped closer, her expression radiating satisfaction at having escalated the conflict to a level where Emma could no longer rely on her physical capabilities to resolve the situation. "Tell them about your real background, Emma," Madison said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent cafeteria. "Tell them about your military service and why you're really here at Oakwood Regional." The challenge was delivered with perfect timing and maximum psychological impact, designed to force Emma into either admitting classified information or appearing deceptive in front of official investigators. Madison had constructed a scenario where any response Emma gave would either compromise operational security or create legal problems that could destroy her future. Emma looked around the cafeteria at the faces of her classmates, noting the mixture of fear, excitement, and anticipation that characterized the audience for this psychological theater. She thought about Jake Martinez, who was watching from their table with obvious concern about consequences that extended far beyond high school social dynamics. She thought about her uncle's warnings about maintaining cover and avoiding incidents that might compromise their carefully constructed civilian identities. Then she thought about Private Mitchell and all the other soldiers she had protected during her military service, people who had trusted her with their lives and safety. She thought about the classified operations that dozens of military families depended on for their effectiveness and security. And she realized that some secrets were more important than personal convenience. "Agent Torres," Emma said, her voice carrying across the silent cafeteria with the kind of calm authority that had once commanded respect from seasoned special operations personnel. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about the scope of whatever investigation brought you here today." Emma reached into her backpack with deliberate precision, her movements careful and visible to avoid creating any impression of threat or concealment. She withdrew a sealed envelope that she had hoped never to use, breaking the wax seal that had been applied by her uncle's commanding officer before their relocation to Colorado. "My name is Emma Rodriguez," she continued, handing the envelope to Agent Torres while maintaining eye contact with Madison Wells. "I am 17 years old. I am a senior at Oakwood Regional High School, and I am the legal dependent of Colonel James Rodriguez, currently assigned to classified logistics operations at Fort Carson." Agent Torres opened the envelope and scanned the documents inside, his expression shifting from official suspicion to professional recognition as he processed information that was clearly far above Madison's security clearance level. The papers contained Emma's actual service record, her medical discharge documentation, and authorization letters signed by officers whose names carried significant weight within Department of Defense circles. "The questions about my background," Emma said, her voice carrying clearly across the cafeteria while her gaze remained fixed on Madison's increasingly uncertain expression, "appear to have been generated by a harassment campaign that has now escalated to the point of potentially compromising operational security for active military personnel." Mrs. Wells stepped closer to Agent Torres, clearly expecting to be briefed on whatever revelations the documents contained. But the agent's expression indicated that the information was far beyond her clearance level or need-to-know authorization. "Mrs. Wells," Agent Torres said, his tone shifting from investigative to administrative as he processed the implications of what Madison's amateur intelligence operation had accidentally uncovered. "I think we need to have a private conversation about how this investigation began and what sources your daughter used to gather information about military families." Madison's triumphant expression was rapidly being replaced by growing confusion. As she realized that her carefully orchestrated revelation was not producing the results she had anticipated. Instead of exposing Emma as a fraud or troublemaker, her investigation had apparently uncovered legitimate military connections that were now being treated as sensitive information by federal investigators. "I don't understand," Madison said, her voice losing some of its confident authority as the adults around her began exchanging meaningful glances that excluded her from whatever significance they had discovered in Emma's documentation. "Emma's just a transfer student. She can't be anyone important." Agent Torres looked at Madison with the kind of expression usually reserved for civilians who had inadvertently wandered into classified areas, mixing annoyance with concern about potential security breaches. "Miss Wells," he said carefully, "your investigation into Miss Rodriguez's background has raised some serious questions about information, security, and the protection of military families that I'll need to discuss with your parents privately." Emma watched Madison's confident facade crumble as she began to understand that her sophisticated revenge campaign had somehow transformed into a federal investigation that was now focused on her own activities rather than Emma's background. The beautiful, calculating predator who had terrorized Oakwood Regional social hierarchy was discovering that some prey were protected by forces far more powerful than high school social dynamics. Principal Dr. Chun stepped forward, his expression mixing administrative concern with growing understanding that his school had somehow become involved in matters that extended far beyond typical teenage conflicts. "Agent Torres," he said carefully, "what exactly do we need to know about this situation from an administrative perspective?" Agent Torres glanced at Emma, who nodded slightly to indicate her permission for him to provide whatever information was necessary to resolve the immediate crisis while protecting ongoing operational security requirements. "Miss Rodriguez is exactly who and what she claims to be," Agent Torres said, his voice carrying the kind of official authority that ended speculation and discouraged further questions. "She is a military dependent whose family situation requires a certain level of privacy and discretion. The investigation that brought me here today was triggered by unauthorized inquiries into classified information, which is now the primary focus of our concern." Emma could see understanding dawning in the faces of the adults around her as they began to comprehend that Madison's harassment campaign had accidentally triggered the attention of federal investigators who were now more interested in protecting military operational security than resolving high school social conflicts. Mrs. Wells approached Agent Torres with the kind of concerned authority that suggested she was beginning to understand that her daughter's actions might have legal consequences that extended far beyond school disciplinary measures. "Agent Torres," she said carefully, "if my daughter inadvertently accessed information that she shouldn't have, what are the implications for her and our family?" Agent Torres considered the question with the thoroughness of someone who had dealt with similar security breaches involving civilian families who had become inadvertently involved in military operations. "That depends entirely on how the information was obtained, who else had access to it, and whether any of it was shared with unauthorized individuals." Ashley Kim, who had been documenting the entire confrontation with her usual thorough precision, suddenly realized that her camera might contain evidence of activities that were now under federal investigation. Her phone trembled in her hands as she understood that her role as Madison's intelligence operative had potentially made her an accessory to whatever security violations Agent Torres was investigating. Tyler Brooks remained silent throughout the conversation, his earlier aggression completely replaced by the kind of nervous energy that suggested he was beginning to understand that his simple-minded bullying tactics had somehow escalated into a situation involving federal law enforcement and national security concerns. Emma looked around the cafeteria at the faces of her classmates, noting that the excitement and anticipation that had characterized the audience for Madison's plan. Confrontation had been replaced by confusion and growing concern about consequences that none of them had anticipated. "Agent Torres," Emma said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent cafeteria, "I believe this situation can be resolved without any lasting consequences for the students involved, provided that everyone understands the importance of discretion." Regarding military family privacy, Agent Torres nodded, recognizing Emma's attempt to de-escalate the situation while protecting her classmates from the serious legal consequences that could result from unauthorized investigation of classified information. "Miss Wells," Agent Torres said, turning his attention to Madison with the kind of official gravity that made it clear this was not a negotiation, "I'm going to need a complete accounting of your investigation methods, your sources of information, and everyone who had access to whatever you discovered about Miss Rodriguez's background." Madison's response was barely audible, her usual confident authority completely shattered by the realization that her sophisticated revenge campaign had somehow transformed into a federal investigation focused on her own activities. "I was just trying to find out who she really was," she said quietly, her voice carrying none of the predatory confidence that had characterized her previous interactions. "That's exactly the problem," Agent Torres replied. "Military families have privacy protections for very good reasons, and unauthorized investigations can compromise operational security in ways that affect national defense capabilities." The remainder of the confrontation proceeded with swift administrative efficiency, as Agent Torres and Principal Dr. Chen worked together to contain the immediate security concerns, while Mrs. Wells coordinated with school board authorities to address the policy implications of students conducting unauthorized background investigations on their classmates. Emma found herself in the surreal position of watching Madison Wells, the sophisticated psychological predator who had terrorized Oakwood Regional's social hierarchy, being escorted to the principal's office by federal investigators who were treating her amateur intelligence operation as a potential security breach rather than a high school prank. Jake Martinez approached Emma's position as the official entourage departed, his expression mixing relief with amazement at the dramatic reversal of fortune that had transformed Emma from harassment victim to protected military dependent within the span of a single confrontation. "Emma," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying genuine awe at the scope of what he had just witnessed, "I had no idea you were dealing with something this serious. Military family stuff is way above anything Madison should have been messing with." Emma nodded, though she was still processing the implications of having her cover blown in such a public and dramatic fashion. Her operational security had been completely compromised, but the protection provided by her legitimate military status had transformed potential vulnerability into a position of strength that Madison's group could never challenge. "Neither did Emma replied honestly. "I knew Madison was conducting some kind of investigation, but I didn't realize she had the resources or connections to trigger federal attention." The cafeteria gradually returned to normal activity levels as students processed what they had witnessed and began spreading news of the confrontation throughout Oakwood Regional social networks. Emma could hear fragments of conversation that mixed accurate information with wild speculation about her background and the reasons for federal law enforcement involvement in their school. Within hours, the entire school population knew that Emma Rodriguez was connected to classified military operations and that Madison Wells' harassment campaign had somehow triggered a federal investigation that was now focused on protecting military family privacy rather than exposing teenage secrets. The transformation in Emma's social status was immediate and dramatic. Students who had previously watched her with curious fear now approached her with the kind of respectful attention usually reserved for celebrities or authority figures. Teachers who had barely noticed her existence began offering additional support and accommodation for her unique family situation. Madison Wells disappeared from school for the remainder of the week, reportedly meeting with federal investigators and legal counsel to address the security implications of her unauthorized investigation into military family backgrounds. Tyler Brooks and Ashley Kim maintained careful distance from Emma, their previous aggression replaced by nervous awareness that their bullying campaign had somehow escalated into matters involving national security. Jake Martinez remained Emma's loyal friend and lab partner, though their relationship was now enhanced by his understanding of the courage and sacrifice that characterized her family's military service. His respect for her had deepened beyond simple friendship into the kind of appreciation that veterans showed for each other's shared experiences and commitment to service. Emma's uncle, Colonel James Rodriguez, met with school administrators and federal investigators to establish protocols for protecting military family privacy while allowing Emma to complete her senior year Oakwood Regional without further harassment or unauthorized investigation. His professional reputation provided additional protection for Emma's civilian transition while ensuring that similar incidents would be prevented in the future. The anti-bullying program that Emma had discussed with Jake became a reality within weeks, funded by a combination of federal grants for military family support and community donations from parents who were grateful that the harassment of military dependents was being taken seriously by school authorities. Emma found herself in the unexpected position of becoming an advocate for other students who were facing harassment or social exclusion, using her protected status and newfound respect to create safe spaces for anyone who needed support or protection from bullying campaigns. Madison Wells eventually returned to school, her previous dominance of Oakwood Regional social hierarchy completely shattered by the consequences of her investigation into Emma's background. Her family faced ongoing federal scrutiny regarding their methods for obtaining information about military families, and her college applications were complicated by questions about her judgment and respect for national security protocols. Tyler Brooks discovered that his athletic scholarship opportunities were affected by his involvement in the harassment of a military dependent, as college recruiters were increasingly sensitive to character issues that might reflect poorly on their programs. His transformation from aggressive bully to cautious bystander demonstrated the effectiveness of consequences that extended beyond typical high school disciplinary measures. Ashley Kim's documentation of the entire harassment campaign became evidence in the federal investigation of unauthorized intelligence gathering, teaching her valuable lessons about the legal implications of surveillance activities and the valuable lessons about the legal implications of surveillance activities and the importance of respecting other people's privacy rights. Emma's senior year proceeded peacefully, with her academic performance improving dramatically, once she no longer needed to expend energy on avoiding harassment or protecting her operational security. Her college applications benefited from recommendation letters that praised not only her academic capabilities, but her character and leadership potential. Jake Martinez thrived in the safer social environment that Emma's protected status had helped create, developing confidence and friendships that extended far beyond their chemistry lab partnership. His academic performance improved significantly, and he received early admission to Colorado State University's engineering program with scholarship support specifically designated for students who had demonstrated courage in supporting their classmates. The story of what happened at Oakwood Regional High School spread throughout the local military community, serving as both a warning about the importance of operational security and an example of how civilian institutions could be educated to better protect military families from unauthorized investigation and harassment. Emma graduated with honors, received multiple scholarship offers from universities that valued both her academic achievements and her unique background, and successfully transitioned to civilian life with the kind of confidence and community support that her uncle had hoped the move to Colorado would provide. Years later, when Emma was completing her undergraduate degree in international relations and preparing for a career in diplomatic security, she would reflect on the lessons learned during her senior year at Oakwood Regional. The confrontation with Madison Wells had taught her that some battles were worth fighting, not for personal victory, but for the protection of principles and people that mattered more than individual convenience. The quiet transfer student who had tried so hard to remain invisible had discovered that sometimes the most important service involved standing up publicly for what was right, even when it meant sacrificing the anonymity and safety that came with staying hidden. Emma Rodriguez had learned to be proud of her service, her family, and her commitment to protecting others who needed support and advocacy. Madison Wells had set out to destroy someone she perceived as weak and vulnerable, never realizing that she was actually attacking someone whose strength came from years of protecting others under the most dangerous conditions imaginable. The beautiful predator who had terrorized Oakwood Regional's social hierarchy had learned that some prey were protected by forces far more powerful than high school social dynamics, and that some secrets were classified for very good reasons. In the end, the bullies who had tried to force the new girl to eat garbage had discovered that they were dealing with someone who had eaten worse things in worse places while defending the freedoms that allowed teenagers like them to attend school safely and pursue their dreams without fear of actual violence or genuine threats to their survival. Emma Rodriguez had kept her promise to her uncle about avoiding unnecessary fights, but she had also learned that some confrontations were necessary to protect the people and principles that made civilian life worth defending. The quiet girl with the hidden strength had found her voice, her community, and her purpose in the most unlikely place imaginable, the cafeteria of a Colorado high school where 3 bullies made the mistake of underestimating a Delta Force operator. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.